as we look at the signs of the times, one of the places we have to look is the nation of Israel. I'm talking about the Jewish people who are known as the Israelites after Abraham, Isaac and Jacob, whose name was changed to Israel and into the 12 tribes. But I'm also talking about the actual physical land, the promised land that God promised and gave after the time of Moses as Joshua led the people into that land. Well, around the time of Jesus, that land was overtaken by the Romans. There were many Jews still living in that land, and Herod the Tetrarch was in charge of that land. But after Jesus died and went up to heaven, and came alive again, went up to heaven, after that time, in around AD 70, the temple was destroyed and the Jewish people fled for their lives and were scattered with a great persecution. This is exactly what the Old Testament prophets had said would happen, that they would be forced to flee their land because they had tainted the land with their sin. Ezekiel chapter 36 speaks exactly about this, that they would be scattered to all the nations. And so for 2,000 years or so, that is exactly how things have been. Jewish people scattered in Africa, South America, North America, Australasia, Asia, all across into every nation of the world. You'll see that the Jews were scattered. That was the case until around 1850, where some of the Jews began to read the Old Testament prophets, and they recognized, as in Ezekiel 36, that God would restore them back to the land. That God says, I will gather you from the foreign nations and I will bring you home. And so just a small group of them began to gather in that land at that time. Over time, more and more Jews began to join them. And then after the Second World War, which ended in 1945, many of the Jews had been severely persecuted and killed at that time. And the international community said, we need to give the Jewish people a safe place where they can flee to, a place they can call their own. And so in 1948, the Jewish people were given back some of the land of Israel, as you can see in this map here. Now, this land of Israel was given to them, but they still had to fight for it. In fact, many of the nations around came against them and tried to stop them from taking possession of that land. In fact, one of the most famous episodes of this took place in 1967, the 6-Day War, where in just 6 days, no other nation was there to protect the nation of Israel, and everyone expected that they would be completely annihilated. But just as you read of many miracle stories that happened in the Bible to the people of Israel, so God moved supernaturally and miraculously, so that it took just 6 days for the Israelites to win the war. Not only did they win, but they also gained all of this extra land. You can see some of Egypt down there and other parts up here as well. And they had so much land, but the Israelites said, well, this isn't all our land. All we really want is to be able to live in the land God has given us at peace. And so they gave away much of that land. And that's how Israel is today. That it's now in a place of relative peace, although there's often nations around it who will be against it, and there are some terrorists around who are there who sometimes fire rockets and things into there. But as a democratic nation, it's living not just surviving, but actually prospering. This is something that Ezekiel in that same chapter 36 spoke about. He said this: after I've made you clean, I will let you rebuild your ruined towns and let you live in them, and your land will be ploughed again, and nobody will be able to see that it once was barren. Instead, they will say that it looks as beautiful as the Garden of Eden. And that's the kind of fruitfulness that's going on in the land of Israel right now, fulfilling the prophecies that were given in the Old Testament through people like Ezekiel. In fact, so fruitful is their land that they even ship some of their fruit to our country here in England. God is working through the Israelites, but it doesn't end there. We have to keep watching Israel, because the Lord says that in the last days there'll be a time after the time of the Gentiles is there, where the Jewish hearts will begin to discover that the Messiah, the person they've been waiting for, has already come, and his name is Jesus, or as they would call him, Yeshua. And so we see that there'll be a turning of hearts back to the Lord, that instead of their stubborn heart, as Ezekiel 36 says, he will sprinkle them with a clean heart, give them a new heart and a desire to be faithful, that they will have only pure thoughts, because God will put his spirit in them and make them eager to obey his laws and teachings. In other words, a lot of Jews will begin to turn to the Lord. And guess what? That's beginning to happen right now in Israel, with many Jews discovering Jesus as their Messiah, and hundreds of messianic Jewish congregations of people declaring Jesus as the Messiah. And of course, That has to happen before Jesus comes back, because when he returns to the Mount of Olives, as Jesus was speaking, he said, and he's grieving for the land of Jerusalem specifically, and he says, "You won't see me again until you say, 'Blessed is he who comes in the name of the Lord.'" In other words, there will be Jewish people living in that land who are willing to declare that Jesus is the Lord and to receive him back. Well, that is definitely a place that you need to be watching if you're going to look for the signs of the times and prepare for the return of Christ. Keep your eye on Israel.